You're excited? Good. I'm excited too, actually. This is the perspective artist study. It's an artist's study because we're going to look at a lot of artists. Digital. This is the first ever digital stream for me, so pretty fun as well. So we're going to look at a bunch of different artists. I have in this tab here, I have a little folder for each artist that we're looking at. Spoiler alert. And I thought first would start with a little breakdown of the kinds. So for me, perspective was always probably like the first thing I grasped. The first thing I felt that I was competent in art. Before I could draw a person, before I could draw a tree, I could draw like the cityscape, in 2-point perspective. So perspective has a special place in my heart. However, I don't know everything about perspective. In fact, I know very little, probably. We're going to find out just how little I know today. But that's the point. So we're going to look at a bunch of different artists, a bunch of different images, and we're going to try to figure out how they achieve depth. As you can see, I'm using Clip Studio, which is excellent. And I should take this very rare digital live stream opportunity to let the fine folks at Clip Studio Paint know there's plenty of woodcutters that you could sponsor. But I think if you choose me, we could be very Genki together. Thank you. Arigato. Clip Studio is like a Japanese Photoshop. And it's well worth the money. And I actually prefer it to Photoshop. I've used Photoshop recently, and Clip Studio is better. So I made some notes, everybody. And if I'm leaving anything out, please do let me know. I think there's a few different kinds of perspective in art. Linear perspective is the one that I'm the most familiar with using because it's mostly for, line art and for comic art. So that's 1, 2, and 3-point perspective. And we'll get a little bit more into this later. A curved linear perspective is kind of a variation on this. Curved linear is like if you're looking, I think it has to do with mimicking the how the eye is round, right? And so how things kind of project onto it. So if you're looking like at tall buildings at a really forced perspective, a lot of comic artists will draw the top curved like that because it's right at the edge of our vision. And sometimes in my own work, I'll put a little bit of a curve if something is approaching the edges of the edges of the picture plane. Even if it's a straight line, throw a little curve on there. I don't know mathematically how to do it. I just kind of intuit it, and it looks right to me, and so it works for me. Isometric perspective, that is SimCity. Ta-da! Isometric perspective means like usually if you were drawing this in regular perspective, this building would be smaller than this building because it's further away. But there's a lot of good reasons not to do that. And a lot of computer games, video games, is the reason. Officially received my red acetate. Very nice, Pinecone. I actually have I have a digital red acetate we're going to be using. I have a layer here that's going to turn things into grayscale. Help us discover the next kind of perspective, which is atmospheric. Which is also called aerial perspective by some. Use a lot of isometric and 3D modeling. Yeah, that's right. It works. It works out. Rather, it's useful for that as well, right? I think architects often use it. So those are the kinds of perspective that I know. If any of you, if I forgot any, please do let me know, and I'll add them to the list here. And then I thought of some strategies for showing perspective, which is also here. So of course overlap, and for these strategies, we're gonna kind of note them in each picture we look at, which ones are used. So overlap, right? The thing on top is the closer thing. Scale, things get smaller as they get further away. Also relative detail. So as things get closer, there's more detail, and as they get further away, there's less detail. Same thing with edges. Oftentimes further away, you can kind of soften the edges, makes it look further. Usually more saturated things are in the foreground, and the background is less saturated. Although I think with this one and with Warm and Cool, you can do a reverse version of it if you're really good, and you can make it work the opposite direction. I forget what that's called, but I think there's certain times of day when when these can be inverted. So warm versus cool. Usually cool things recede and warm things are more salient. They come forward. Higher contrast in the foreground, less contrast in the background, and thicker lines in the foreground and thin lines in the background. That's what I got. Also, I want to just show a couple of things before we go back to this digital setup. A couple of things here. This is the book that I got when I was a kid. And this is the first thing I used to learn perspective. This was great because it's in comic book style. And it lays it out fairly easily, although it does get really complex. I went back and read it in preparation for this live stream. And it does get really complicated later on in the book. But it's pretty well described. And it worked when I was a kid, so... And it's comprehensive as well. And it's much easier than this book, which is what I got in art school. Yeah, salient. Salient is a good word, right? This is impenetrable. Don't try to read this book. But and this is the classic perspective book from days of yore. And finally, when I was looking for this book, I found another one that I forgot about. I read this 10, 15 years ago. And this is kind of the history of perspective. And this is a really interesting book. And I'm glad I found this because I'm going to read it again. I remember really enjoying it. But it goes back to the Middle Ages and it gives a history of the development of perspective. So for all of you perspective nerds, this is the way to go if you're interested in the history of it. So, and finally, I made a visual aid for anybody who is confused about perspective. This is a really helpful thing to make. This is a paper towel tube with some electrical tape. And so usually, and we'll see this in a few minutes, when you're looking at something, if it's at your eye level, the lines are parallel. And then as it goes below your eye level or above, the parallel lines start to curve. So you can see this starts to curve away. And as you go up, this line, tilt it, starts to curve that way. And so to wrap your head around how shapes work in perspective, making this is really helpful. You can hold it out, you can tilt it like this, and you can see how things react. So, anyway, I don't know if any of you have used this before, but you can do this on a pencil too. It's simpler on a pencil, but it's easier to see on a paper towel tube. I thought I would start looking at this one. This is from Creative Illustration by Andrew Loomis. And this is another thing that I think people have trouble wrapping their head around, is where to put the horizon line. And so you can see the horizon line in each of these. See, so this is the picture plane, and this is us. So your eye level is within the picture. There's the horizon. And you can see this figure and this figure are roughly the same height because the eye level lines up on the horizon. Same with this figure here. And these ones. They're all standing up. They're all about the same height. These two are lower because they're standing in the water. And these two are sitting down. So they're going to be well below that horizon line. And here's below the picture. So you're looking up. So you see the bottom of this guy's chin. There. And we have these lines. So there's the vanishing point here. He's indicated. And so this should go roughly to that vanishing point. as should that. So this would be... this is a 2-point perspective, but for the purposes of the cropping, I think it's just a 1 point. Because the vanishing point for this is so far away, it's not going to really be affected. Anyway. This is above the picture. So we're standing up on a high thing. And we're looking down. We can see the rooftops, the tops of the buildings here. And these lines should recede to a vanishing point over here somewhere. Same with the street. And so that's how we can find where the vanishing point is. Find the horizon line. And same here, we're looking down on the top of the table. And we're looking down on the top of the cylinder. Pretty straightforward. All right. Now's the time where I'm going to try to learn myself. So the first pictures here are from the Inkernomicon. This is from Rendering in Pen and Ink. And he says down here, perspective is of great importance in representing furniture. Sketches such as these may be made when speed is essential. So these are simple. This is a simple 1-point perspective, basically. And let's figure out where the horizon line is. I know that it's above here because I can see the top of the chair. And I know I can see the top of the table here. It's going to be up somewhere. And we can use these floorboards and see where they intersect. So our horizon line should be somewhere here. And check that. These lines. So pretty simple. So the vanishing point's in the middle of the composition. So everything that's moving away from us is going to go to the horizon line. Now the chair is turned, so these are going to go somewhere else, but they're going to go on the horizon line. So this vanishing point is only for stuff that is relative to it. How would you put it? This vanishing point is for stuff that's on the same plane, right? Like the house is square to itself. So everything structural on the house is going to go here. But we can turn the chair relative to the house. And so so the chair is not going to use the same vanishing point, but it's going to use the same horizon line. Does that make sense? Top of this should go to the same one, more or less. Fixed objects. Yeah, fixed relative to each other, right? And then everything that's going this way is just parallel. In this view, at least. If we stepped way back and we turned our head a little bit, it might if we go far enough, it'll converge, but in this view it won't. And then same thing with the verticals. All the verticals are just going to be perpendicular. So same with these ones up top. Let's look at something more interesting. Oh, sorry. I forgot I want to do this too. So in this picture, he's using 1-point perspective. And let's see. He's using overlap. We can see that this is in front of this. 1-point perspective using overlap. And not a whole lot more, right? I think that's all he's really using for this one, right? Simple 1-point perspective and some overlap. And we get good depth in that image. So let's look here. This is a really simple one. So I wanted to go with this one first. This one, the horizon is really simple because we have the sea. The horizon line is here. And here we're using, let's see. These lines converge. Going about here. This is a good way to establish a focal point as well. If this ship, they want us to look at the ship, putting the vanishing point near the ship is helpful. We can see these lines all more or less recede this area. For me, when I'm doing perspective, usually I just kind of eyeball it, and I think a lot of people do. A lot of people also draw out a grid and make it precise, but I don't think it's super necessary. You can see this one here. It's coming way off. So either this is at a different angle than everything else, or it was just eyeballed. Looks like it might be built at a different angle. It still goes to this horizon line, also more or less. All right, let's see what else. These lines would recede. Yeah. Somewhere, hold on a second. Somewhere this way. And they should also end up on that horizon line somewhere. They're a little bit off. And that is also fine. Because when we're looking at it like this, we don't really notice. And it kind of does look like this one down here is at a different angle as well than these. So maybe it's built differently. But this is good. The first time I ever did this was with some comic book pages. I think it was John Byrne. And none of the lines converged in the same spot. And it made me really happy. Because it means that professionals budget. Yeah, you can get away with fudging lines, especially the further away from the picture plane that your vanishing point is, the more leeway you have for fudging where your lines are. So if the vanishing point is really far off of the picture plane, it's not going to be super noticeable. If your vanishing point is within the picture plane, you can still get away with fudging it a little bit, but I think it'll be more noticeable. So they're using 2-point perspective here. And we have scale. I'm noticing scale right away. Like that. Scale. So this figure is larger than this figure, which is larger than all of these. So as they get further away, the figures get smaller. Also overlap, of course. This is in front of this. Saturation. The most saturated color is this. The next most saturated color is that. And after that, everything else gets less and less saturated. You can see this one here. The relative detail, yeah. These figures are pretty simple. And you can see the face of this figure versus the face of this figure. And here you get a little bit more detail. The hair. Yeah, exactly. More like guidelines than rules. And like I said, the first time I discovered that, it was a huge relief. Because the biggest problem for perspective, for me, and I think for a lot of people, is that it seems so mathematical. And it doesn't really have to be. Like I said, almost all of the perspective that I use, I do based on feel. Not on measuring. There's a few pieces I've done where the perspective was really important, so I laid out my grid, but usually I don't bother with that. Let me see. We got more contrast in the foreground. Contrast of color and contrast of black and white. Our line thickness. Yeah, so these lines are thicker. Not by much, but... And we can see here, maybe some thicker lines in this than in this. Go with that. I don't know, warm versus cool in this one. What do you guys think? The whole thing feels pretty warm to me, although the yellow's cool. And the edges, I don't think there's really a lot of work with the edges going on. Everything feels pretty outlined. I think we have a little bit of atmospheric perspective So the thing with atmospheric perspective is, it's called that because it's the atmosphere is in between you and the thing that's really far away. And so stuff really far away, there's more, I guess, water molecules in the air in between you than stuff that's closer. And so as things get further away, they tend to turn into the color of the sky. And so we'll see more examples of that, I think, later on. But this is Hiroshige, Japanese woodcut artist. And this one very, very clearly is using atmospheric perspective. Yeah, this is a super good example of atmospheric perspective. And you can see how it, this and the sky, the color, colors are converging as it gets further away. And so this is more saturated. This is less saturated. We can have that. I want to look at it like this as well. You can see it in grayscale. There's much darker values. There's much more contrast here than there is back here. And actually, this background, when I get rid of the color, the saturation, it doesn't really change at all, does it? So it's basically becomes gray in the back here. There is some 2-point perspective going on in here as well. See it with the bridge. So these lines will go that way, and these will go this way on the posts. But it's very, very subtle. It's not a big part at all. It's just a little hint of it. Let's say relative detail. Also scale. Obviously, these figures are bigger than this figure. Overlap. Right. They're in front of this. This is in front of this. In front of that. And beautiful lost edges. Let's see. Edges. The lost edges like here, right? Maybe down here. Yeah, this is a really, really beautiful piece. Really good example. Nice softness. And yeah, almost. To me, this is kind of a revelation, right? Because it looks... Let's color pick. I wanted to do some color picking too. This looks like it has blue in it, but let's find out. Yeah, no, this is just gray. This is here. Foreground. And we get this kind of intermediate... It's almost white in the background. Very, very minimal. Sorry, my color wheel. Why don't I move this here? See a little bit of that. There we go. Our eye tricking us to think the gray's blue. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? I'm really surprised that that's totally gray. I was pretty convinced that that was blue. Until this. The mountains behind the foreground trees almost disappear. Oh yeah, crochet. You're right. I hadn't even seen that. It's over here. I've got another panel slightly off screen. I didn't think it was necessary for you guys to have that in the crop here. Here, right? Just make it out. Wow. I wonder if I think so we say it every single time that all of these artists we've looked at, it has to be intentional what they do, right? And I bet if we got rid of this, the composition would be worse. Yeah, I'd say so. What do you guys think? That subtle little bit back there, it really helps out. Me. Distracting. Here. Definitely makes a difference. Required for balance. Yeah, and we didn't even notice it, right? It's such a minor thing. Man, that's amazing. It also makes a weird tangent too, right? Like, this kind of matches up with this too closely. Yeah, that's awesome. Wow. Good work, Hiroshige. I guess that's why we still know who they are. I think it reinforces the artist's forced perspective, and it works. Yeah, I think it does. And it's an interesting choice too to make it the same value as this here. It gives us I mean, I guess we are working with a foreground, middle ground, background, right? We're working with these figures would be the foreground, and then the middle ground would be this. Then the background would be here. So there are three kind of planes. So keeping this on the same plane as that, it still works compositionally, and it's good simplification. Here, thick versus thin lines. This is just lines versus no lines, which I think is a variation on that, right? So here we have a holding line for these figures, and here it's just the shape. So that's another way of achieving that. I don't think warm versus cool is used here. I mean, I guess relative. What, this would be like a relative warm, right? But I'm not sure if that's really applicable because we have all these cool shapes here. This is warm too, but I guess the I would group this text in with the foreground. I would consider that in front of these trees, even though there's not really an overlap. The use of black here and in the figures, to me, connects these on the same plane. So I think this would be a foreground element. This is kind of like this same kind of similar line and some same kind of color. There's no line in the middle ground. Instead of warm versus cool and forced perspective, he's doing it to emphasize the people in the foreground. Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. More as a focal point, right, rather than a perspective. Yeah, that is a very good point. Even the I think this is probably the most saturated thing. We have here versus that. It's actually the same. Saturation is the same. And for anybody who's not familiar with the color wheel here, up and down is the value, right? White to black, and then left to right is the saturation. And then the hue is the circle. Value versus color can be very, very tricky. Yeah, and certain colors too, right? Crochet, the saturation happens at a lighter or a darker value, right? Like a blue, darker blue is more saturated, but for red, I think it's at a lighter value. All right, let's move to the next example. Red has to take grayscale for them. Well, speaking of which, this is an example that Crochet sent. So I should mention that this perspective study is brought to you by the letter Crochet. This was redeemed by Crochet's channel points. And so that's why we're looking at perspective today. And for those of you who don't know, every month I do artist study stream. Next month will be Miyazaki. So this is by maybe the greatest watercolorist in the history of the world. A second greatest after Crochet. The person whose name I can barely pronounce, if at all. Zbukvic. Anyway, look up this guy's work if you're not familiar. You can see his name here. Once again, that background. Almost totally gray. Desaturated. So here we are using atmospheric perspective. And beautiful atmospheric perspective. I suppose there's a horizon line in here somewhere, but it's really not important for this. So you don't need to use linear perspective to show perspective. So you can see that value here, foreground tree, take the middle ground tree. Background tree. So I think this one has the most contrast. Sample this. The lightest part. Now to me, this reads almost white. This reads almost black. But actually, we can see here, that's not the case at all. So that's an interesting illusion. I guess it makes sense that this, yeah, the background here is lighter. So that's where we're getting our contrast then, isn't it? The lightest part of the background, aha! Aha! The lightest part of the background is here. And the darkest part of the foreground is here. So we're getting the most contrast in this tree, and this is the most foreground thing. We can tell it's the most foreground thing because of scale, but also, see, that go into the ground. This one's a little bit higher up. Even if this is on a little hill still. As things move closer to you in linear perspective, right, they get closer to the bottom. So if there's a person standing up front, and then there's another person who's the same size standing further back, their feet will be, that head will be further away as well. That can be a cue. We'll see more of that later, I think. So that's an interesting technique. That's a good one. The light versus the dark. And then the contrast gets less here and even less here. And there's the atmospheric perspective. This tree and the area around it. Very similar value. Crochet, do you have anything to say about this since you chose it? Let's see, the edges start to get lost more here. The edges here are harder. Saturation and contrast. And again, not so much warm versus cool as maybe saturated versus desaturated. There's a bit of a, I mean, this is cooler than this, right? But not so super obvious. These tiny highlights are delightful. Let's see. Well, I like the what is this called? The skylight? Whatever, the sunbeams. A little bit of that cutting across, I think, is great. And little dappled shadows here. Really wonderful. And like I was saying before with the this is our horizon. If this is indeed our horizon, let's just pretend this is a 1-point perspective. Everything kind of comes this way. If this was flat, this would be lower. But we know that it's not. Because it's higher, we can kind of map it on the perspective grid going up. Whereas this is more flat. He's masterful with paper moisture. Yeah, I read his book. He has a really good book on watercolor. A few years ago I read it when I was trying to figure out. And he has like a clock of paper moisture, right? And it goes from like super, or maybe it's a scale, I don't know. It goes from like super wet to like to damp to moist to dank. He uses a coffee metaphor, right? Coffee and tea for thickness of the paint, I think, as well. But it was really helpful. And he does like, getting a little sidetracked, but he does his whole background in just one wash, right, Crochet? Like he'll just load up his brush, start throwing this in, mix some color in, and then just not touch it. Just go in one pass, basically. Creamer or milk, yeah, that's right, that's right. So, maybe the greatest living watercolorist after Crochet. I think we can go for relative detail here as well. All right. 3-layer technique mostly. So this would be the background and then maybe that foreground detail. Anyway, that's a different live stream. Let's move on. This is another one that Crochet sent. Apparently Debi Riley. And this is similar to the one we just looked at with the atmospheric perspective. So the color of the sky, and as we go further back, things get closer and closer and closer to the color of the sky. See. Saturation. That's our foreground. Get more of a middle ground. Oops. Background there. That background is there. This one I think we got some warm versus cool going on. Our warmest stuff is here, even within the trees. We got these warms. And then it goes through a warmer green to a cooler green to our blue. Near the middle, the valley gets very white, like fog clinging to the low points. Oh yeah, like here, you get like this kind of misty thing, right? The Bob Ross mist. Yeah. And that will push things back too, right? Relative detail, I think there's not a whole lot of detail in any of this, but there is. It's much more variegated in the foreground, so that would be the detail. And of course, the edges with watercolor. Pretty hard edge here. Here, some hard edges, and all soft going through here. Contrast as well, right? These areas are really high contrast. The contrast takes your eyes on a pleasant journey. Oh, that's you know what? That's something that I should add to the strategies list now that you mention it, Crochet. Add that. How would you put this? The visual journey. And I think there might be some examples where that comes into play later, but let me... well, why don't we look back at the Hiroshige? I think maybe this might illustrate it. If we enter the composition here, and maybe because this is a Japanese print, that's what you would do. Usually in Western art, we enter here or here. But if we're to enter here, we go on a journey. We go up through the figures, and then we get pushed back this way. Then we get pushed back this way here. And we end up back here. And so a lot of art will lead you in the composition either from the most foreground to the furthest background, or from the furthest background to the most foreground thing. And so that would be another strategy. And that's good. Once again, the importance of doing these studies is coming across these things, right? Let's see. Composition. Yeah, composition might be a good way to put it, but I think composition might be a little bit too broad. I'm thinking a little more specific now. This is something that I'm looking at a lot lately. So a lot of the things that I chose here are chosen from books that I have on my shelf. So right now I'm reading the old Hal Foster comics from the 30s. And so chose this for that reason. It's a little blurry on the edge. It was really hard to get a good scan because the books are giant. So here, this figure has the most contrast. There's black. There's not a lot of black on these other figures. And see what colors we have. And there's a contrast here. There's a warm and cool contrast just within the figure that the other figures don't have. And then as we go further back, figure, one, and these ones get even more grayed out. Approach that background color. So that's interesting. I would have expected this foreground, this to be a little bit different value, but he's using color. We can also see this head here. Gotta get some espresso in you. This head is tilted back, so we see the bottom plane, and then the forms go like that. Is pointed away. Excuse me. As with the paper towel tube. The horizon line. Let's find where that is. Find that. Let's see if Hal Foster was true to perspective. Did he use? Did he eyeball it or did he use guidelines? And we're also assuming that this castle is on the same plane relative to itself. This might be slightly offset. Now, this one looks a little bit more forward, and this one looks a little bit more back, so let's not use those. So the horizon line should be somewhere in here, I guess. And that makes sense because it cuts right through Val's head. So that would mean that we are maybe also sitting on a horse. And you can see the top of the horse's head. So that would also be an indicator. See the top of the pelvis. Like that. And this highlight. So the hair, the head is a sphere, but this highlight is pretty flat. I think if it was up here, it might be more shaped like that. So that would be our horizon line. More or less. And this would be, I think, maybe a 3-point perspective. Although it's really going to be really far off. But these will eventually converge somewhere in the bottom. And then these lines would converge on the horizon line over here somewhere. These ones too, in a different spot. So maybe the bridge and everything aligned with it. Vanishing point is here. And maybe the castle is on a slightly different plane. So we have 3-point perspective. There's a bit of atmospheric perspective here. You can see the color of the mountain. He's using black. I think he's using black as a framing device. Here and here. Like a vignette. So that wouldn't really be falling in line with the atmospheric perspective. Because you would expect this to be maybe a gray rather than closer to a black. But I think there's a bit of atmospheric in here. And of course overlap. Definitely scale. Let's see. Val is in the foreground here. And these figures are much smaller down here. And these figures are bigger than these figures. And they're bigger than these figures. So there's scale. Also relative detail. I think we can do saturation as well, right? This here. More in the foreground, more saturated. Compare those reds. The castle here. Yeah. Less saturated. Get thicker lines. These lines are all quite thin. I'm not sure. Lines all look pretty similar. I don't think he's using line weight variation to achieve that. And like even here, these are even thicker. That's the same line, yeah. So no line weight. Oh, there's a warm versus cool though, isn't there? All of this is pretty warm, right? And then once we get back maybe here, we get cooler. And it looks like only this part is warmer, right? Because this green is a cooler green than this green here. And the visual journey here, in this panel at least, yes? I don't know. Do we come in here? Go back this way? Or do we come in? Well, let's see. The previous panel ends here. So it looks like we would come in through here. We go there. Zigzag our way. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's more complicated with a comic book panel too. So it's interesting that this is a darker value than this. You would expect that to be inverted. But again, like he's using this black shape and this black shape as a vignette. And so that whole business is out the window maybe. This is the foreground and this is the background. These values fairly close to these. These are a little bit darker. Not by much. What I have here. This one was this. This one is this. Yeah, so that's stacked. Okay. So the darker value is the mountain, which you would expect the mountain to be a little bit darker than the sky, even if it's further back. But maybe this is supposed to be a bridge to here, because these two are almost the same. This kind of groups. So maybe that is a part of the journey. nectar. Not really sure. This is high. There's a high contrast here to here. High contrast here to here. So there's not a lot of not utilizing contrast. And that's the thing with these strategies too, I think, right? Is that you don't have to use all of them. You could ignore some of them as long as you use other ones effectively. So like he uses scale very effectively, right? Like there's a figure here and there's a castle, and the castle is, if we take this, the size of Val and his horse, and then we compare that to the size of the castle, the same. So I think he's using some of these other ones very effectively. It's a high key, yeah, that's right. And yeah, totally up to the context of what you're trying to do. I wonder if certain of these work better with each other than others, right? Like I wonder if we were to go back and check the previous ones, would there be commonalities between which ones were selected, right? I'm not sure. Probably would have to do more with the subject matter and the medium. I'm guessing that, like, in watercolor, you're going to have a lot more atmospheric perspective, whereas in line art, you're going to have a lot more linear perspective. We'll move on to a very local artist. Chiang Ming Shyan. His pinyin for his name is very different than the usual pinyin, so I'm actually not exactly sure how to pronounce it. Maybe Chiang or Jiang Mingxian. But this is an artist from Taichung, from my city. One of the venerated artists of my city. He just had a huge retrospective at my local art museum. And I got the very last copy of his book. Those of you who are Patreon patrons may recall I did a video looking through his book. And anybody who wants to see that, it's $3 a month. Artists tend to favor the same strategies over their... Yeah, that's true, Crochet. That's absolutely true. For me, it's... I definitely favor linear. Although more and more I'm getting into atmospheric. I think linear works a lot easier with woodcuts. And there's definitely ones of these that I favor over others. Can often reveal the painter by those aspects of their style. I bet if you had like good to choose, they give you 3 names of painters, and then they just give you this chart. I wonder if you could choose which painter it was. So this one here, this is ink wash, and I guess it's watercolor, some paint. But there's linear perspective. And it would be, if we zoomed out far enough, it would be 3-point. But I think for the purposes of this, it's just 1-point perspective. See the bridge here. And that would lead us to our primary focal point. I guess which would be this. And that would be where we have our highest contrast. I think the secondary focal point might be here. Maybe here. And there's definitely atmospheric going on as well. All this. So overlap, of course. Buildings are all overlapping one another. They go further back. And scale. This thing is bigger than this one. Relative detail. Let's zoom. Use this. Bit more detail here. Much less here. This one is almost a ghost. Another one here. You get further and further back. And I would say that like the perspective is not quite exact on these, but it doesn't really matter It's close enough for the feel of the piece. Relative detail, definitely edges. Look at this. Man, look at those marks. Just the vaguest hint of buildings. And I like that these ones are kind of outlined, but not so precisely. Much energy. So this artist, he spent decades like traveling the world and making art. He spent a lot of time in Europe and in China as well. Spectacular indeed. The art museum in my city is a really, really good museum, and there's a lot of great shows there over the years. But this is my favorite show I've ever seen there, is this guy's work. Those reflections. Hold on, we're supposed to be looking at perspective. Let's see, saturation. I think in the foreground it's more about the black. And then in the midground and background, we get more of a saturation. So we have, watch here, watch here. All of the black is in the foreground. I think foreground would be here. Oops. Be this, right? And then middle ground would be this chunk. Then the background would be this bit here. And so contrast, definitely. Let's look at the lines, thick versus thin. Maybe not even only thick versus thin, but also variation, I guess, would be another thing to look at with the lines. Look at that! Ah! We got more of this mist, right? As it rises up out of the city. So this is darker and this is lighter. This is like a mini perspective just within the object. And look, there's some buildings, something amazing. So his lines, I guess maybe not so much thick versus thin, but the lines would be black versus gray, because his lines turn to this color. They go further back. That's the viewer filling. Yeah. And you can kind of see that, like, there's a hill or something here rising up. Look at this. I think this is the that inverted warm versus cool I was talking about earlier. I think the warmest part would be in here, right? And then this is all pretty cool. So this is a reverse warm versus cool. And I think the visual journey does lead you further back as well. He uses the temperature to contrast instead. Yeah, right. More colorful parts of the focal point. Yeah, I think the focal point, at least for me, I was saying this because of where the perspective brings you, but I wonder if this is maybe the focal point. Upon first viewing, hold on, I want to get rid of this. Watch, as soon as I get rid of this, we're gonna look at something where I need it again, but that's okay. Just so I can just do that. For me, upon first viewing, I'm so focused on linear perspective that this seemed to me to be the main focal point. Plus, this has the most contrast, or at least in the midground, this has the most contrast. Maybe not compared to this, but I wonder if this, the mist in the back, which in the Hiroshige was almost gray, but in this is very pink. Yeah. It is, that's right. There's a lot of, that's pretty white. A bit pink. And the rooftop is pink. Yeah, you get these different shades. Yeah, it's subtle, but you can see. The bridge is pointing you at that set of buildings, but the color leads you to the left. Yeah, so there's that journey, right? The visual journey leads you here, and then the color pulls you over, and then we got it's like canyon of mist pulling you back here. I think you go through maybe like this. This puts you back down to these birds, and it brings you back into the composition. Very difficult to look away from this, but I feel we must move on. This is an artist called Michael Reardon. You all can see the artist names here if you're interested. Atmospheric perspective here, once again. And right away, I think saturation. This foreground here, get these super saturated oranges, and then less or so up here. That too. Value, interesting. Oh, we'll come back to that in a second. Watch this. Isn't this the guy who used to be an architect? I'm not sure, Crochet. I don't know much about him. I had this painting in a book, so this was scanned. Like I said, most of these pieces here, are from my book collection. Overlap as usual. This is in front of this, is in front of this. Overlap is the absolute most basic, and I would put scale along with that. Bigger houses here, smaller here. Brilliant breaking of rules with those rooftops. So how do you mean that, Crochet? Do you mean keeping them as saturated as they are? This contrast. So this is a... what would this be? Analogous color? It's orange and then not quite blue, right? It's purple. Oh, warm roofs. I see. Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. Yeah, so this is all the same value, more or less. I like how we have this dark shape kind of as a barrier, as a separator. So the foreground, you would expect traditionally, you would expect the this to be darker than this, but it's actually not. Although there is more contrast, I think, here to here between these buildings and this here, and then of course the contrast here is very high. Not as effective. I think that the color is really doing the heavy lifting in this one. Contrast. And definitely the warm versus cool. Although there is some warm back here. But it's more muted, right? Like this is super saturated. Where's that? Yeah, saturation. These brilliant oranges. And I love the color palette. Purples. Bringing out a perspective, saturation, and going to focal saturation with the background roofs. Focal saturation. So do you mean that because the saturation is higher here, this is the primary focal point, and the saturation is lower here, and that's the secondary focal point? Not often I find art that stands better outside of value. Yeah, usually value is the most important thing, right? After composition, but that can be broken. And contrast works in this one. Relative detail as well. Get these. All the little details here. Look at... Oh, man, I didn't even notice this green. How much green is there? A couple splashes. And none back here. So this is the accent color then. So this would be a secondary palette. Right? No primary colors at all. It's greens, oranges, and violets. The saturation is used at the bottom for perspective and in the background saturation where it might not really be to bring attention. Ah, I see. To draw the eye. I wonder if it's also a connector. Between foreground and background. We have this great big barrier here blocking us off. And then we have this kind of color rhythm or something. So it's not not completely isolated. Feel like a nice clean orange. Is that a road at the bottom or frozen river? Now, there's a good question. Yeah, it might be. I thought it was a road. Yeah, it looks kind of like a road, but now that you mention it, I would believe it if you said it was a frozen river. I love that. Just a little splash of green here and here. And, you know, a little bit within the trees, but kind of mixed in. Amazing. Talk about connecting the background. We have the houses here, and we have one here. One here, there's one here. Kind of helping to lead us back through. I would say there's a visual journey going on here. Come back through. We were supposed to go like that. Something like that. And I do think, actually, there is some linear perspective happening. But I wonder if they even put in a horizon. See that this is tilted down a little, so the horizon line should be maybe somewhere here. Hard to tell. We're definitely looking down on the tops of these. Pretty straight on these. Maybe we're floating really high up. Be flat. The roofs are tilted too, so we can't really use that. Did I do this? I wish. I wish. Has those drift-like things on it. You mean here? I read that as light coming through, but it might be drifts. It is a weird road if it's a road. Maybe it's just a path. But I certainly would believe river. And yeah, you'd think it gets wider here and narrower here, Plumsing. So that's a good point. A road would be more consistent, right? And a road would have some kind of look more fall than winter. If this was in Minnesota, you could do it. In the fall, you could walk on the river. This is my favorite painting in the Art Institute of Chicago. Gustave Caillebotte. Was it Paris, A Rainy Day? So this is much more of a linear perspective. And it would be 3-point, but for the purposes of the painting, I think it's more 2. And so I would suspect that the horizon line would be on the eye level. These figures. Let's see if that tracks. More or less. Yeah, pretty much. And the vanishing points, those buildings. Let's look at this one. Yeah. Around here. So, I usually think the focal point is probably this guy. So that makes sense that the vanishing point would be around here for most of these buildings. He does great wet surfaces. Yeah, he really does, huh? I guess it's kind of related to perspective because you have to do the reflections in perspective. Like, this needs to be in perspective as it goes down, right? This has a bit of... We'll call this 2-point for now. It has a bit of curve linear, right? As we get towards the edge. Might just be the road, but I feel like it doesn't look like a hill so much as it looks like the perspective creating it. The curve is the curvilinear perspective reverse utilized here for the background building creeping away. We have yeah, there's a little bit of a curve going on here too, right? And then there's also atmospheric perspective in here. You can see this compared to here with the detail and stuff. And outline the street meat too. You mean here? Yeah, there's a little bit of a curve there, right? And it doesn't feel like a hill. It feels more like curvilinear perspective, so I guess we'll stick with that. I never noticed this man holding the ladder, so I'm glad for that. I think these are figures. What do you think? These look like figures, right? There's one there. So we're definitely getting, where are we? Relative detail. Overlap and scale as always. Scale, this figure is this size. These figures are smaller. Edges. Yeah, we're losing a lot of edges back here, for example. So, with the eye level, I usually try to notice this just to reinforce it in my own mind. So if we take the horizon line to be this guy's eye level here, then everybody who is the same height as him would have their eyes on the same line. And if they're taller, their eyes would be above. If they're shorter, their eyes would be below it. So she's a little bit shorter. Him, I think he's shorter. He's also hunched over a little bit. But even if he straightened up, I think his eyes would be a little bit below this. So he would be shorter than him. And I don't know, maybe there's some depth to this sidewalk. Like maybe the sidewalk is up a little too, so maybe he's standing a little bit higher. But these two look much shorter as well. And then back here, like, my line is a little bit a little bit thick. Maybe he's taller. Who knows? Saturation 2. This is the best example of saturation used purely for perspective that we've seen yet. Is that right? Is it because there's not a lot of color variation, right? This is getting close to monochromatic, right? A monochromatic palette. I mean, it's not. Obviously, there's some red here, there's some green, but it's all pretty muted. So why don't we here this green? These would be our foreground, and then pair it with that. Background there. Yeah, definitely more saturated in the front, especially these greens. Yeah, let's do this. Oh, not a big change either, huh? It's really, really desaturated because when you do this, it doesn't even change that much. In the foreground, there's the bright green post and wall, and as it goes back, it's less and less distinct. Not gray exactly, but yeah. That's right. And so all the contrast is happening. I mean, we have our foreground forms. We'll call these people foreground, right? Anything kind of in front of where the street crosses. All these figures. And then midground, less or so. Background, less or so. Contrast. I don't think it's I was gonna say this might also be a reverse warm versus cool, but I mean this is cool This is warm. The sky. The sky is warm, and this is cool. So we have both warm and cool in the foreground and the background, right? No lines in this one. It's a painting. And I'm not even sure there's much of a visual journey here. Well, I don't know what it is about this piece. I love this piece. I've loved this piece for a long time. I've seen it many times in person. And I don't meander so much as take in the overall gestalt of it, the feeling of it, the mood. I don't know. Foreground is defined by that brilliant rule-breaking lamppost. You mean having a strong vertical dead smack in the middle of the composition? Let's see how close to the middle of the composition this is. Right in the center. Look at that. This dot here and this dot here. These are the center lines, right? That is exactly in the center. And so here's the very middle of the composition. Yeah, that's amazing. Get away with that. And I think it has to do with the balance, right? The right side, all of our big figures are on the right side, all the big shapes, and this is all small stuff. Although, I guess this building would be considered big shape. Very well balanced. Like an inverse journey, it meanders to the front. So Plumsink, you come in like maybe like that, go through the background, go through these figures, meander around and get to the front. It is great. These umbrellas also offer a good opportunity to look at objects in perspective. The umbrella is half of a sphere, right? And so, continue this. Round like that. We have a half of a sphere. And then we can see these perspective lines coming around. And if this was continuing, as it's moving, the part of the umbrella that's closest to us might be here. And then as it moves away from us, the lines would go more like that. And we'll see more of this in an upcoming example. Maybe a U-shaped journey. Maybe like that. Come in here. Yeah, maybe that's the journey. I'm just glad I noticed him. All these years I've never seen this. I like that the umbrella is covering his face. And so all these umbrellas, all in perspective. See, right? This is just to the right of whatever is closest to us. So it's moving that way, and as it recedes, it gets further. Then as it recedes away from us, it goes in that direction. Here. I guess if you're trying to learn how perspective works on a curved surface, drawing umbrellas is a pretty good thing to do. Because it has the built-in grid line, kind of. The built-in topographical guide. But that's a side note. It seems like you will definitely notice the guide for it. Yeah, I definitely... This is the front. And it's also because the eye level is here, which means that that's our eye level. I mean, the horizon line is here. And so our eye level is the same. We're roughly the same height as these figures. And so we would be put as another figure on the street. And that's another thing to note, I guess, about perspective, right? Is wherever the horizon line is, that's where you are situated as the viewer. And so we are in this space, right? If the horizon line was way up here, we would be looking down on the tops of everybody's heads. His hat, right? On his umbrella. We'd be looking down on it all. We would have a bird's eye view. And it would be a very different piece if that was the case. Or if the horizon line was down here, we'd be looking up at the bottom of the umbrella. Figure like that. I never heard it expressed that way. The horizon line is the level of the eye. That's useful. Yeah. That's a big thing to people have a lot of trouble, I find, with that idea. And it's sort of like I don't know, it's a really important thing, is that the horizon line is where you are as the viewer. This is from Sin City. Yeah, exactly. Every painting includes the viewer because it's from their eye view. Yeah, so you have to I don't know, for me when composing, thinking about where I want the viewer to be is an important part of coming up with a composition. So holy crap, look at this. This is 1 point, more or less a 1 point perspective. There was a great sketch club reference that had flights of stairs when we're drawing. That was fun. Yeah, flights of stairs are tough, notorious. They don't have to be. So we can just follow these. Let's see. I'm imagining that it's going to be somewhere around here. And I wonder how Frank Miller even gridded this out or just eyeballed it. There's a kind of a tell I noticed earlier that he may have eyeballed it. Let's see. Okay, so the vanishing point somewhere around here. And so we're floating, right? We're floating above the stairs, looking straight down. This is kind of like the same perspective as this one here. You know, looking straight ahead into the room, whereas we're looking straight down. So I think around here somewhere, the vanishing point. Scale, so I see, I was looking at this a little bit earlier and I noticed like, I don't think this railing is tall enough. I think this was definitely done without guides. And it works. It looks good. This figure is bigger. They get smaller and smaller and smaller as they go down. But, like, look at the railing compared to his hand and his feet. I feel like this railing is dangerously low. But I think you would have to do that to see the figures. I think maybe this should be a little taller. Then that would throw all of this off. I think there's a lot of faking it going on. We could also use that. Yeah, that kind of goes there. I'm also interested in how you draw the figure from this angle, right? So the head overlaps the torso, and then the pelvis is down here, and then the legs. You would use the paper towel tube. And you can see that he's using this rendering following the contour. So if this was our paper towel tube and we had our tape, the rendering lines would follow the tape because this is going this way, away from us. The open end of the tube would be here. Oh, this one, yeah. Yeah, this was a wild one to deconstruct, right? We have these lines here going down, and then there's these lines here. They converge up here. These ones converge here. All the different directions. And stairs. Stairs are really hard to do in perspective. I mean, they're simple if you break it down, but trying to wrap your head around it, I always have trouble. Yeah, a little fisheye, and I imagine that the photo would have been distorted as well. And you get like this kind of super up close around the edge. So yeah, the figure, get like the torso. And so he's using these lines to really sell it, right? And choosing how they work. And I guess they would start diminishing maybe in size as they go down. But this bit overlapping that seems a little bit wonky to me. But But I thought this was a cool and a daring piece. So overlap is not exactly working in this one. It kind of kills the perspective a little. The whole thing is contrast, so that doesn't really work. Maybe the relative detail. Yeah, there's relative detail. I would say there's a visual journey. I start here. I guess you would start here, but you'd come in. You go down the stairs as you go. And thing I wanted to mention, I forget who I saw said this, but it was about thumbs, or fingers rather. Thumb is a finger. And if we have a finger like this, we have our perspective lines like that, like the thing, the paper towel tube. But then we have the thumbnail, fingernail, and he said, drawing this line going this way kills your perspective. You want to use this line. It doesn't kill the perspective. And if you can get away with drawing the front of the nail going like that, maybe an S curve, it doesn't counteract the perspective as much. But if you draw it like you see it, it messes with the perspective. Same if you draw the cuticle in there. But if you're drawing it from this angle, then it doesn't, right? Then it reinforces it. Anyway, that was just an interesting an interesting tangential thing that I remembered I wanted to share. All right, so let's see what's next. Got a few more to go through. This one. This is Jim Woodring from Frank. I wanted to look at this one because talking about the cross contour, you can really see it in this shape, how his hatching follows along. We have our umbrella lines again. The hatching follows the form, and it follows here, and then this is a turn. The vanishing point for these would be over here somewhere, but then the inside of the door is on this vanishing point. If this is 2-point perspective, these will converge somewhere here. We'll get our horizon. These will converge somewhere over here. So these hatching lines want to go to the same vanishing point. And these hatching lines want to go this one. And then inside the window, these ones will go back over here. But inside of these windows, this plane is the same plane as this. Same with here. And because our horizon line is here, if we look at our paper towel tube, we'll see that anything above it is going to curve in that direction, away from us. So our hatching lines follow the form in that direction. If this was inverted, this big shape was down here, then we would expect that he would hatch it in this direction instead. If that makes sense. It is playful. Yeah, I love Jim Woodring's lines. I have definitely stolen some of this for some of my hatching. I definitely like to use this from time to time, especially if I'm hatching with a brush. But just in general. And it's fun making these marks too. But I digress. I wanted to look at this weird gourd object here. So we can see, I guess, that the horizon, because we're looking down, these are going this way. The horizon line might be here. But then this is coming towards us. So if this was straight up, then we would expect the hatching flatten out around the horizon and then start to get more and more rounded as it goes up. Just like it flattens out more, gets more and more rounded as it goes down. But we can tell that this is coming towards us because the way that these lines go. We had our paper towel tube coming this way. Go like that. So I wanted to look at this just for that point. I think that's important to remember. And when using ink, it's really powerful being able to reinforce your perspective with the hatching. You could also do it this way. And I think I would find what I think is the closest point. Might be here. And then everything to the right of it would gradually start to curve out. And then everything to the left of it gradually start to curve out that way. At least that's how I would do it. I don't know if there's a better way, but I always think about what's closest to me, and that's going to be what's the most vertical. So, also he's doing it on the trees here. We can see that this tree, this part is moving away from us. He's hatching it that way. But then this branch is going in a different direction. So the hatching changes direction. Gustave Dore. Oh, man. Although on my screen, it's more like Gustave More. I'm getting a little bit of a More effect from all these lines. But we can zoom way in. Oh, man. Look at how many lines. This is atmospheric perspective. There's a little bit of linear perspective as well in the trees. I think, like what I was saying with what Woodring was doing in the previous example, we can see this tree kind of moving like this. Maybe moving towards us in this part. So he's using the direction of the hatching to indicate which way these shapes are going. He does it on the figure as well. We can see that this figure here is leaning towards us, and he's really selling it because his hatching is moving this way. Right? If the figure was leaning away from us like this figure, and the hatching would be more like that. Is more like that. It's really simple and super effective. He has a lot of lines, right? Dang indeed. This is super incremency, yeah. I think this is in etching. I think Dore does etchings. This is from, I have the book up here somewhere. This is the Divine Comedy. We can see with like the hand is kind of moving away from us. So the hatching follows it in that direction. We get the overlap, of course, showing who's in front. But I really like this this very simple use of showing he's leaning in and he's leaning away, like so they're leaning towards each other. Just with that direction of the hatching, the etching. I guess there would be scale with the trees, maybe. Trees get smaller as they go back. And also the contrast. This is black and white, so there's not really saturation. But as the trees and everything recedes, they sort of start to merge towards the same gray. We get the highest contrast here with the white, the black of the hair. How do you even look at this and then want to make something? It's such a mood. This would be a low key piece, eh? We get the edges. We lose. Look at how he made this tree. This is a single line. It comes across. It changes direction. It goes back. It's almost like a topographical thing. And the line just follows, you know, right on across, changes its thickness, and it changes its direction to give us the perspective. It's amazing. It is cross contour, yeah. The whole piece is one big cross contour. I think his foliage, hey, the foliage is cross contour too. Look, this could be like a mountain range on a topographical map. It's so abstract. And then we just get out further, 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 and oh well, all of a sudden it's foliage. Incredible. Anyway, so even though this is atmospheric perspective, I think that it's actually secretly linear perspective because of all the cross contour. I think he's smuggling in. It's a linear perspective masquerading as atmospheric perspective. I salute you, Dore. Oh, jeez. So how do we move on? Oh, I know how. We have Moebius. The last three here are Moebius. Unless anybody has anything else to say about Dore. I think Moebius does a lot of the same stuff. Well, as everybody else that we've looked at today. Linear. This would be mostly 1 point perspective. Where's our eye level? Oh man. He must have gridded this out, right? Be perfect. So that means our horizon line is here. And that means that we are just above this figure. So maybe we're sitting on a taller horse, or maybe we're taller. Definitely gridded. And so like this figure's standing, not on a horse, so he's much lower. So yeah, we would be on a horse that was this tall. Something like that. And then you can see, I think here, the hatching on this cylinder is pretty straight across, but as it gets further from the horizon, it starts to curve a little bit in this direction, paper towel tube style. And that would mean as it goes up, curves in the opposite direction. And as we get further, it becomes more noticeable. More, what'd you call that? It's not acute. More extreme. More horizontal here, and more of a curve. And if this was continued, it'd be more like that. More pronounced. That works for me. Like a visual crescendo. Interesting. And then here we're seeing the inside of the cylinder. And so our lines are going this direction. Dead. So this is the convex side and the concave side. That's pretty instructive. These buildings also, same thing. They're above the horizon. And so all these curves are going to go that way. And then not much going on below the horizon in this one, but I guess here, this curves in this direction. Like these faces. And his hatching kind of follows that line as well. The brown arc in the background sees different, directly up from the tower. Let's see. This one here. So I'm gonna guess maybe it's either less of a curve or far larger. So maybe it would be more soft. Or maybe when he got to the background, he just stopped using his grid and eyeballed it. But yeah, that is definitely less of a curve. That's an interesting choice. It's very kind of dark, pretty saturated, I think, green. Oh no, actually, you know what? My eyes were confusing value for saturation. That's pretty desaturated. But next to this. Very interesting. Okay, let's pull out the old red acetate. So this would be... foreground is lighter, and we get darker as we go back. We have more contrast here with our figure. So this would be the darker shape on the lighter plane. It gets darker as we go further back. I don't know about relative detail, because this building here is pretty detailed. This one is less. Detail is fairly consistent across the whole thing. And I think Moebius's line is usually pretty consistent as well. Okay, there's a visual journey going on. But the linear perspective is the main thing in this one, I'd say. I believe that deeper value green is a device to draw attention to the perceived height projected. Interesting. So you're saying he's using it to show that this is a taller building? So I would have guessed that it was kind of a patterning here to here. Kind of like a jump. There's no warm versus cool really, right? Because we have this cool. This is kind of warm. I would say that's cool. Although, would you say that's a warm green? It's a cool green. Oh, and again, the hatching following the curve there. Shows that you're in a city in a mountainous region. So maybe maybe this building is sitting on a hill. This was provided by Plums Inc. This is 3-point perspective, and this is nuts. The main vanishing point is down here. The nadir. The nadir is the low vanishing point, and the zenith is the high one. So this is the nadir. I think that's how you pronounce it. This is the main one, but then of course these all recede to their own vanishing points on. We go back that way. So there's the regular 2-point perspective going that way, and then this side going that way. Would have this here proceeding in this direction. But they're pretty far off of. Maybe not. This one's kind of closer, I guess. And so we're looking down. So our horizon line is pretty high. And if these actually converge here, then maybe our horizon is here, and maybe our horizon is even. I might put it at an angle. Might put it there. And then we would be maybe standing here, because the nadir would be directly below where we're standing. And so then all of these points will recede down here. And that really is effective for the vertigo and for the depth. And our poor character here. I think his name is John Diefool. This is from the Inkle. The previous one is from Airtight Garage. So all these lines converge there. And these lines would converge on the horizon line somewhere over here. They should all converge around here somewhere. Because these cylinders are below the horizon line, we're looking down on them. Paper towel tube moves this way. Our figure, if he was wearing a belt, would be doing that, wrapping around. And then the cylinder of this leg moves that direction. And this one goes this way, looking down here. So he's reinforcing it with the hatching again, going that direction. This would be a cylinder going that way, hatching like that. And then I guess the neck would be coming out there somewhere. And we have scale. Overlap, of course. This figure is closer to us. These figures are smaller. And then... So this is showing that like... I guess this is the 42nd floor. And so this maybe is the 41st floor. Figures get smaller. Then these figures are smaller. And they get smaller and smaller and smaller as they go down, as they recede away from us. And the relative detail gets less. So these figures have a little bit. And then these figures less. Bit of a blurry image because it's a little bit of a small image. The file at least. But you get the idea. So... and also... The tricky thing can be, how do you draw these figures standing in space? And it's actually pretty straightforward, right? We use the vanishing point. And then we have our figure, just a cylinder. Kind of like that. And so, all of our figures, more or less, should recede that same vanishing point, right? This guy's leaning, so he's at a slightly different angle, but I bet his legs probably go that way. The same with these figures. And so we have this effect around here of these figures' heads are on the right side of the body, because they're on the right side of the vanishing point, I guess. And these figures' head would be on the left side of their body relative to here. And then these figures' heads would be on the top of their body relative to there. And if we were going to extend it down here, if I wanted to draw another figure here, the head would be more like that. One vertigo-inducing city? No, I would not want to live here either. But I feel like drawing an image like this is really daunting to think about, but actually deconstructing it like this, it's really straightforward. Like this bridge would go to the horizon line, right? Everything either goes somewhere on the horizon line, 1 point, 2 point, or to the nadir, the third point. Okay, relative detail. His edges are mostly the same. He's got everything that's in the foreground, basically, is darker. And everything that's in the background, it gets lighter, mid-ground. And it's kind of a gradient until we get to the white where the nadir is. So this is white. And then it gets more and more saturated as we come up. Simple color scheme. Not using warm versus cool as a perspective element, but more as a storytelling element, I guess, right? They're inside this room, so there's warm light. But definitely saturation. You would like to do one like this? Yeah, the warm versus cool is inside for outside, yeah. Emphasizes his edges. Yeah, that too. Yeah, that emphasizes kind of a plane change. Yeah, that's a good observation. At least on this wall, things that are going this way are yellow. Things that are going this way are blue. For this section. His lines are usually the same. I think there's more contrast up here. Most contrast is, I guess, right in front right in front of where our hero is moving. That makes sense. This would be, I guess, our focal point 1 and focal point 2. And contrast showing the depth. I guess it's pretty simple achieving depth in an image like this. I think even his lines, they start to turn into dots. We get further away. They get less distinct. But actually, I'm going to call that thick versus thin. He doesn't do a whole lot of thick versus thin. Some, but I think that dotted line is a stand-in for a thin line. And the visual journey is definitely here. It's this. There it is. Straight down. So I suppose there's some atmospheric perspective in here as well. Line weight, but it's pretty subtle. Like Moebius uses mostly the clean line. I feel like this, some of these, I guess this is a little thicker, but that dash, the making the line turn into a dotted line would definitely be line weight. How could I resist? I need to choose one of these three Moebius pictures, but no. So definitely seeing our foreground shape here. The background is here. But it'd be linear. This is another 3-point, but it's more subtle this time. These lines converge at the nadir, somewhere way down here. Same with the boat. And then we have these lines converging this way. But they're all mostly rounded, so it's a little bit softer. And then we have another set going this way, boat. And we're looking down, so our horizon would be somewhere up top. And I like that we're looking down on the top of these birds. I think that's really nice. I think that happened in the previous one too. I think there were a couple of birds. Yeah, we're looking down on top of the birds here. The background, especially right background, seems tilted up. May just be elevation. Yeah, I think you're right. It looks like here, right? It looks like this is moving up, and then maybe this goes uphill. And I think probably... How does he achieve that? Do you suppose it's the fact that these shapes... Like, if they were flatter, they would change size and shape a little bit, maybe? They'd be a little bit more oblique. Maybe a little smaller, because they'd be going further away. But they're not... Yeah, similar size. Yeah. Yeah, if this was flat, you would expect that these would be smaller shapes, right? That would go... Yeah, it would go more like that. So that's an uphill. Quite soft. Definitely a differentiation between foreground and background. Some slight... I think some slight... I don't know. I'm not sure I would call this atmospheric perspective. Let's see. We have... And here. And there's definitely a separation between foreground and background, but I think it's more for the sake of storytelling. It's framing this really nicely. This is the most saturated thing. Take that compared to these. Subtle technique emphasizing change of tilt by not using the expected perspective. Yeah, that is right. And it's kind of a surprising discovery too. I think also it works well for the composition. I think if it was flat, you might tend to leave the composition here. Because it's tilted a little bit, maybe you come around more. Like it's more of a barrier. Yeah, no line showing the change of tilt. So using the... I want to call that texture, even though it's not necessarily texture. But using texture to indicate perspective is a traditional comic book move, right? Because like we were talking about with the rendering following the shape of the form in the previous one, this one, the texture. If this is a texture, then having that texture follow the shape of the form works well. Like you can use texture to indicate perspective. Maybe I should have added that to my list. Still can. It's not too late. This is also from Airtight Garage, by the way. And so if we have a vanishing point down here somewhere, the nadir, then once again our figure will... He's kind of leaning. You can tell from that. Kind of leaning forward, but his legs should go down to the same or similar vanishing point at the bottom there. And then we see this is on top, overlapping here. Go with overlap. And scale. We can see the scale from the birds. 1, 2, 3. So the birds don't overlap each other, but this bird is the biggest one, and they get smaller and smaller as they move away. So that relative detail. Anybody have anything to add before I pass out? You learned so many things. Great, I'm glad, Potato Knight. And thank you, Crochet, for the bits. That's to your Blender journey. Yeah. This perspective is a foundational skill to be applied to so many things. And just even if you're just drawing a person without any background, knowing how this works to render the cross contour, so useful, so beneficial. You get out tonight, enjoyed yourself immensely. Great, good. You too, Plumzink. Thank you. I'm glad. I love this stuff personally. I could probably talk about perspective for another 15 streams. But we'll spare everybody.